Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Last week, the Supreme Court struck down many of the tariffs that have become a landmark part of President Trump's economic policy. So what's next? Robert Whaples joins us. Robert is the professor of economics at Wake Forest University, also editor of the Independent Review. Robert, great to speak with you. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me on again.
I always enjoy it when we get to connect. And I think it's important that we just explore the history of what has happened. You and I spoke about this when tariffs were first suggested by the Trump administration, and then we spoke about it when they were enacted, and we weren't seeing the results that were promised, and so now we find ourselves in this juncture. So walk us through what has happened in the history.
Yeah, well, I guess if you go far enough back, tariffs have always been a part of American history. The Articles of Confederation didn't work out so well because Congress didn't have any taxing power, so they granted themselves the power under the Constitution when it was enacted. And basically, the first thing that they did to raise some money was to enact a tariff. Tariffs were our main source of revenue for the government for the first 100 years or so of the Republic. But we always knew that they, had some problems, and later we adopted the income tax amendment, et cetera, and so tariffs kind of went away. And because tariffs rose so much during the Great Depression and were seen as one of the causes of deepening the Depression, the tariff wars amongst countries, the consensus was made, I think, after World War II, that we should just gradually lower the tariffs. And they set up organizations to do that, first GATT and then the WTO. And those tariffs were getting negotiated smaller and smaller. Last couple decades, I would say not so much. And then, of course, President Trump came in, and he was not a fan of the old way of doing things and wanted to put these tariffs in place, and so raised them to levels that we really haven't seen since, before World War II or so.
Now, like you said, they've been reestablished as a very prominent tool by this administration, and particularly the executive office of this administration. So walk us through what we knew going in and what we've come to discover constitutionally as well.
Yeah. And so economists have never been fans of tariffs. I did a poll of professional economists a few years ago and asked, do you agree that imposing a tariff or other restriction on trade like that will decrease the overall welfare of society? And it's like 94% of economists said, yeah, tariffs are going to reduce the overall welfare of society. So that goes back to the theories we have, like comparative advantage from David Ricardo. But you can also see this in a simple supply and demand framework as we teach our students. So we were never fans of these tariffs, largely because we think that there are gains from trading among the countries. So why would you tax their products at a higher rate than any other products? It's just distorting people's choices, distorting the consumer's free choice of getting what's the best deal for them. And so Trump obviously doesn't see it that way. He sees imports as destroying American jobs. But, of course, when you put tariffs in place, that'll shift the different things that are being produced. And you might save a few jobs in some industry, but then other industries have to pay more for goods that are coming in, and maybe they use those goods to make their goods. And so you might actually end up destroying jobs in another industry. When economists have looked at it, they really haven't seen much net gain of jobs from these tariffs at all, right? And if you do save a job in a particular industry, there's a lot of research, say, from the first Trump administration, that it was costing hundreds of thousands of dollars to consumers to save one job. And, of course, those workers aren't getting paid anywhere near that amount. But Trump has always been a fan of these tariffs, as we know, although he's had his wings clipped by the Supreme Court ruling in Learning Resources, Inc. v. Trump. And I was reading through some of the arguments that the Supreme Court justices were making in their opinions, and it looks as though Trump clearly overstepped the bounds of what the legislation he was citing under the IEEPA, as Justice Roberts put it, based on two words separated by 16 others. The president asserts the independent power to impose tariffs on imports from any country on any product at any rate for any amount of time. Those words cannot bear such weight, said Justice Roberts. I was surprised that it wasn't a 9-0 ruling. Actually, myself, it was a 6-3 ruling. But it seemed pretty clear that this was overstepping bounds.
Yeah.
But now we were faced with the aftermath of this, because if this law was illegal, which the Supreme Court says it was, I mean, not all of Trump's tariffs are. He has the ability to put in place kind of uniform tariffs. But these specific tariffs now being struck down, apparently there's $130 billion that was collected under this, and now these people are due for refunds. Apparently there's about 1,800 lawsuits out there already to try to get refunds from this. And so that's going to be a can of worms, and it's going to take years and years to litigate and see exactly who gets payments for what.
I agree. The IEEPA 1977, that's exactly what the Supreme Court was evaluating, and they've sharply curtailed it because it speaks to the application of tariff programs, but tied to declared national emergencies. So, genuine trade deficits. I think the fentanyl drug trafficking was one of the emergencies.
That was one of the ones they used, yeah.
But,
and so, to think that was an emergency that meant that we could slap like this big tariff on everything coming in from China seemed to strain credulity, I think. So.
Now, in order to give our listeners the context of understanding exactly what you said earlier, I've read the analysis on this, including a New York Fed analysis, Peter G. Peterson Foundation, and others. And what you said really does bear weight, that a lot of these tariffs wind up having the ancillary effect of burdening interiorly, nationally.
They
do. I know some analysis, they took the numbers as high as 90%. I don't know if I believe it went that high, but I invite you to comment on that.
I saw a study that looked at, tried to pull together all the studies that have been done by, economists published on who actually bore the tariff. And so we know from economic theory that there's a difference between who bears the tax and what the law says about who will bear the tax. For example, if you look at the gasoline tax, the law says that the money is going to be sent by the gasoline station, but they don't actually bear that tax. If the tax goes up 10 cents a gallon, the price at the pump is probably going to go up 9 cents a gallon. The consumers bear the tax, even though the gas stations send them the money in. And so it actually has to do with how steep or flat the supply and demand curves are, in your standard economic analysis. And what most of these studies of the tariff have shown is that the prices in the United States increased by most of what that tariff was. It didn't mean that we were able to buy things cheaper from other countries. It meant that we, the importers, bore just about, again, kind of 90% is the number you will see in most of these studies. We were bearing this tax. Now, who in the United States bore the tax? Then you got to split it down between the consumers and the businesses. Most of the studies kind of will give you, I'll say, like a 60-40 split there, with most of that being borne by the businesses, but a good 40% of it borne by us consumers. So the businesses had to eat some losses, and we consumers also had to bear some of that tax. I don't think the consumers, though, are going to be in on any of these lawsuits.
Yeah.
And so I think all the gains are going to go to the producers and not we people who actually had to pay more for these products. We'll see what the lawsuits do, but I'm skeptical. So
okay, to give further credence to your words, too, I know we're running out of time, but the other macro-wide effects of the tariffs, those are really hard to gauge, which means in some ways the people have been absorbing it. Yeah, I'm so sorry, Robert. We're really running out of time. I enjoy whenever we get to connect with each other. Thank you so much for making the time.
Can I add one last
thought? Sure, yes.
And that is, it is Lent. And so, we shouldn't be thinking so much about, spending all our money. Maybe we should tighten our belts a little bit and just suck it up this time. But, okay, I'll talk to you next time.
Talk to you next time, Robert. Thank you. My guest has been Robert Whaples, professor of economics at Wake Forest University. And Robert shared his wisdom with us when tariffs were first enacted. The studies are actually bearing out right now that they've actually impacted the consumers in America in ways that we don't even see yet. And so let's keep praying for equilibrium economically in our nation. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.